Should I start? Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I pray that you're doing well and that you had a good prayer. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us to verse 282 in Surah al-Baqarah. And these verses are very important in terms of how we engage in transactions, how we deal with debts, and also there's a beautiful spiritual lesson at the end regarding taqwa and knowledge. So I think Brother Shad, mashallah, started this verse yesterday, and this is the longest verse in the Quran. And it's the longest verse because it deals with how do we engage with financial transactions. So inshallah, I'll start in the middle of the verse. وَاسْتَشْهِدُوا شَهَيْدَيْنِ مِنْ رِجَالِكُمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you go and you engage in this financial transaction, and you mark your debts, make sure that you have witnesses. And you have two witnesses. So this is important, and as we'll discuss, there is a difference in our religion between riwayah and shahada. In riwayah, the majority of the scholars, they say one witness is enough. So if you look at the hadith scholarship, if you look at the seerah literature, if there's one person, whether it's a man or a woman, that narrates a hadith and you trust that person, then you go ahead and you accept that. However, in the shahada, you see that there is a higher threshold, that it's preferable to have 2, sometimes 3, 4, and as we'll see later in Surah An-Nisa, even for the had of zina is 4 witnesses. So this is important because the implications are higher. If someone is telling you a story, and you want to verify that story, and you hear one good witness tells you that story, then you may believe that. But if someone is committed a crime, whether it's in terms of finances, whether it's in terms of murder, whether it's in terms of theft, then you want more witnesses. Because someone could in fact go to jail. Someone could be executed. Someone could be punished. So you want not just one, as it says here, but shahidaini min rijalikum. Also you see that it says min rijalikum. And the ulama, the mufassirin, they say, why is there emphasis on min? It could have said, just get 2 witnesses from anywhere. But it says, مِن رِجَالِكُمْ. Why? Because from your men, from your people that you know, that you trust, that you know that they are honest, that they have probity, adala. And these are not just anyone, but you have chosen them because you rely upon them. Then it continues and says, فَإِن لَمْ يَكُونَا رَجُلَيْنِ فَرَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ مِمَّنْ تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ. So then it continues and says that if you cannot find those witnesses, then you can have a man and then 2 women. So there's a lot of debate and discussion on this verse in particular about gender equality in Islam. Why is it that there's 1 man and then 2 women that are required in this testimony? So once again, we go back to our discussion of riwayah and shahada. So in a riwayah, there's no debate, no discussion, that if there is a hadith narrator that's a woman and a hadith narrator that's a man, that they're equal. And we know this from the seerah, that Aisha radiallahu anha, she narrated many hadith, mukthirat, and others, Salama, Hafsa, and no one comes and says, no, we need two women for every single man. So in a riwayah, we accept that a woman has the same probity, intelligence, memory as that of a man, and we accept that. In shahada, the other scholars, they say, well, in shahada, the testimony and the implications are higher. That in a transaction, in a murder case, that if someone messes up or makes a mistake, then someone could be punished unjustly. An innocent person could go to jail. So they say that this is the reason why you have a higher threshold when it comes to the witnesses. And they also say that sociologically, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that women did not engage in these financial transactions. They did not necessarily know or knowledgeable of them. So when they came to this and to testify, they may have made a mistake at the time. But in other areas, in fiqh, we know that when it comes to the issues of children, many of the fuqaha and many of the judges, they would take the testimony of the woman over that of a man. For instance, if a woman, she had a stillborn child, she was giving birth and the child came out and it was not living. They would actually rely on the testimony of the midwives more than that of the men, because they understood that women had more expertise in this area. Here Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, they make a comment on this verse and in testimony in general, and they say, yes, there is this difference between riwayah and shahada, but for them it's about the credibility of the witness, and there isn't necessarily a distinction. For instance, they say, there's no doubt that the reason for the many of women in the Quranic verse, this verse, is only in recording testimony. However, when a woman is intelligent and remembers and is trustworthy in her religion, then the purpose of the testimony is attained through her statement, just as it is in her transmission and religious knowledge. So just as in riwayah, we accept Aisha and Salama and Hafsa, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim says, if she is trustworthy and she's intelligent and she is knowledgeable on the affair, then we accept it also in shahada and within the different court cases. And then it continues and then says, أَن تُضِلَّ إِحْدَاهُمَا فَتُذَكِّرَ إِحْدَاهُمَا أُخْرَى. So if someone, they're in this and they don't have knowledge in this affair, then the other one will support the other in the testimony. وَلَا يَأْبَ الشُّهَدَاءُ إِذَا مَا دَعُوا. And the witnesses should not say, no, I'm not going to come and testify. So this is also very important. This verse, so deep and rich, is that many times when people are called for testify or to testify on a contract or even a marriage, they don't do it. Why? Because they say, I don't want to get involved. And sometimes the witness, they saw the haqq, they saw what happened. But when it comes time to go in front of the judge, they get nervous and they don't want to go because they know there's implications, that they could be punished, they could be targeted by the other party. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here, if you're called as a witness on a contract, then you should go as a Muslim, as a believer. They trust you. They have faith in you. And if it comes time to go in front of the judge and testify on the haqq, then you need to go ahead and do that. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَسْأَمُوا أَن تَكْتُبُوهُ صَغِيرًا أَوْ كَبِيرًا إِلَى أَجِلِهِ. And if this is a small transaction or a big one, make sure you write it down. Don't neglect it. ذَلِكُمْ أَقْسَطُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ وَأَقْوَمُ لِلشُّهَدَاءِ وَأَدْنَى أَلَّا تَرْتَابُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is the most fair and just thing. What is this verse really about? It's about justice, about fairness, making sure people get their money. All of us have been in situations where we're in a deal and we felt cheated. Someone took advantage of us. They robbed us. They stole. How can we prevent this? That we write everything down. That we make sure it's clear. That there's witnesses. That no one is there to doubt what occurred. إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً حَاضِرَةً تُدِيرُونَهَا بَيْنَكُمْ فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَلَّا تَكْتُبُوهَا. So the only exception to this is that if there is a quick financial transaction. For instance, you go to the store, you're making a quick transaction there on groceries or a piece of candy or a drink, you don't necessarily have to write that down. But when it comes to issues of debt, a house, a marriage, big things like this, of course, we have to make sure everything is crystal clear and both parties agree. وَأَشْهِدُوا إِذَا تَبَايَعْتُمْ. And then make sure you have witnesses and you do this testimony and write everything down at the conclusion of the contract. وَلَا يُضَارَ كَاتِبٌ وَلَا شَهِيدٌ. And do not harm the scribe or the shaheed. And this is also so beautiful, that a lot of times in these transactions and in court cases, what do people do? They intimidate the witness. They intimidate the scribe. So don't write that down. Or they will look at them, they'll stare at them, they'll threaten their families. And here in this country we have witness protection programs. Why? Because if someone stands up and says, I'm going to testify for the truth, and the other party doesn't like it, then they could be hurt, punished, even killed sometimes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, do not hurt the person, do not intimidate the one who's writing the contract down and testifying to the haqq or the witness. And then the concluding section, وَإِن تَفْعَلُوا فَإِنَّهُ فَسُوقٌ بِكُمْ. And if you do this is a great transgression. You cannot intimidate people who are part of this contract and testifying to what it says. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ yu'allikumullah. Allahu Akbar. And this is one of the beautiful things, and I want to say that it's an honor to be part of the Fajr Tafsir program and to be here with all of you and to pray and to study the Quran. Because one of the things that's so beautiful is that the ayat that deal with the ahkam, they end with spirituality. And some of the most beautiful verses that deal with spirituality are connected to verses on ahkam. So, for example, in Surah Talaq on divorce, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. This is a beautiful verse, the verse that personally I recite and I remember and I think about. That if you have taqwa, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will find an escape for you. That you feel trapped and you feel there's no way out. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you have taqwa and you really are mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you will find an escape. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of this verse about debt, about transactions, about writing things down. What does it say? وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يُعَلِّكُمُ اللَّهُ. And this is a section of the verse that many of us who studied Islam and طلاب العلم, the students of knowledge, this is one of the first things they tell you. If you want to know Islam, if you want to study Islam, if you want to be knowledgeable about this deen, then you need to have taqwa. That you need to have piety. You need to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You need to pray, you need to fast. The spirituality isn't disconnected with knowledge. And this is something important that when we send our kids to college, that in college and high school and they study and make sure you do the homework. But this isn't devoid of spirituality. This is make sure you pray. Make sure you fast during the month of Ramadan. Make sure you go and do umrah. These things will help you because you have a sense of purpose in your life. That's not disconnected with your career and your academic studies. Wallahu bi kulli shay'in alim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most knowledgeable over all things. And He ends with His Asma al-Husna. He could have said Qadir, He could have said Aziz. But what does He say? Alim. Don't think that one of the reasons why people do injustice, because they don't really believe in this name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He's al-Alim, that He's knowledgeable. Because people behind the scenes, they're doing this, doing that. Why? Because they don't think someone's watching them. They don't think someone is knowledgeable of their affairs. If they knew there was a camera there watching them, they wouldn't do it. But because they think no one's watching them, then they go ahead and act in that particular way. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am knowledgeable over all things. Don't think when you're dealing with the money in the masjid you're good and nice, but when you go out into the corporate world and you go out into your businesses, that I don't care and I don't watch what you do. No, the business, the money is part of our deen, part of our religion. So brothers and sisters in Islam, to conclude, we see that there are some lessons we learn from this verse. The first one is the importance of shahada. Many times in our communities, we make agreements. And we say, oh, this brother and this sister, I have a good relationship, I trust them, we make a quick deal, and we don't call the witnesses. Whether it's in marriage or whether it's in business. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, make sure you have the witness. Make sure you have multiple witnesses. Because later on, people come and say, oh, didn't we agree on this? They say, no, we never agreed on this. And we all have examples from us. And we thought we had some type of agreement, and the person comes back and says, no, I didn't agree on what you said. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, make sure that you have witnesses and multiple witnesses that can corroborate. And then the second lesson we see here is the importance of writing things down. A lot of times in our communities, we also have agreements, we have meetings, big functions, but nothing is recorded. No one knows later on what happened at this meeting. We have a big organization, we're supposed to have financials recorded, written. Everyone should know where the money is going, right? But it's no one written down. People are spending things and we don't have any financial documents, right? So everything in our deen, this is part of our religion, that if you look into our history, people wrote things down. Contracts, court documents. You have tafsir, hadith, Quran recitations. This is a community of writing. And we should encourage writing within our communities. Yes, we believe in the Quran and its oral nature. But just after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed away, the community began to write it down. Even during his life, they were writing the Quran down. So we as a community need to revive the spirit of writing and recording and documenting everything that we do. And lastly, we see a very beautiful lesson. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يُعَلِّكُمُ اللَّهُ. Subhanallah. Have faith Have consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He will teach you. Who of us do not want to be knowledgeable? Who of us do not want to know and understand things? All of us. So that's connected to spirituality. That's connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's connected to Al-Alim. Who can teach us? Al-Alim. Al-Alim can teach all of us. And if we have faith and trust in Al-Alim, then He will guide us and teach us in our various affairs. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.